In the small town of Ashford Hollow, Massachusetts, 1872, a young girl named Eleanor Ashford vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was dismissed as a local tragedy, yet whispers told another story, that the Ashfords themselves were guardians of a dark legacy, one hidden behind the grandeur of their ancestral home. Neighbors recalled the hollow echo of church bells, calling to congregations who never truly prayed. Eleanor's absence was the first crack in a carefully constructed facade. The house, though lavish, seemed to breathe with malevolence, its corridors extending beyond architectural logic, as if designed to trap more than footsteps. Reports surfaced of late-night gatherings in the estate's grand hall, candlelight casting long shadows over the marble floors. Servants spoke in hushed tones of chanting, and distant townsfolk swore they heard children crying from rooms that were, on paper, empty. The sheriff, a man of principle, arrived too late. His questions were met with smiles that did not reach eyes, as if fear itself had been domesticated and trained to conceal truths. Within Ashford Hollow, curiosity was dangerous. Families whispered warnings, and yet the legend of the missing Eleanor grew. Something ancient seemed to anchor the house, a force older than the town itself, a darkness that demanded secrecy and compliance. The Ashford family was not just prominent, they were untouchable. Their influence stretched from the local church to the orphanage that took in the town's most vulnerable children. The disappearance of Eleanor and later other children was recorded only in scattered journals and obscured letters. Reading them now, one can feel the cold precision of a family both adored and feared. Even today, standing before the crumbling mansion, one wonders, was Eleanor taken, or had she been consumed by a darkness no one dared name? The Ashford estate had been constructed in 1812, a monument to opulence, yet riddled with symbolism that outsiders could not decipher. Gargoyles, carved with disturbing precision, watched every entrance, their expressions shifting as though aware. The gardens, sprawling and meticulously maintained, were a maze, designed to confuse and disorient anyone who entered without invitation. Locals claimed that on stormy nights, the paths would twist, and footsteps would echo where none had walked. Inside, the family's private chapel was decorated with frescoes depicting violent acts masked as religious piety. Angels with hollow eyes presided over scenes of punishment and suffering, their wings stretched unnaturally, as if to imprison those they touched. In the library, volumes chronicled the family lineage, but interspersed were journals detailing rituals, names of children, and strange diagrams hinting at something unspeakable. The books smelled of decay, dust, and something metallic, like dried blood. Scholars later claimed the texts were encoded, blending local folklore with obscure European rites, producing a pattern no outsider could fully comprehend. The Ashfords moved through their mansion with deliberate ritual. Meals were quiet, almost ceremonial, and servants noted the weight of gazes that could paralyze a grown man. Children, including Eleanor, were kept under strict observation, yet the estate seemed to absorb their laughter, twisting joy into an echo of fear. The townspeople, once welcoming, grew wary. A sense of oppression settled over Ashford Hollow, palpable enough to be felt in dreams. When outsiders attempted to question the family, they were met with charm, money, or quiet threats that left no mark. By the mid-1800s, the Ashford name carried a dual identity, one of respectability in public and of whispered horror in private. The Ashfords ran St. Margaret's Orphanage on the edge of town, ostensibly a haven for children left parentless. On paper, it was a place of charity. In reality, it functioned as an extension of the family's mansion, a testing ground, a reservoir for those they deemed expendable. Orphans were subjected to rigid schedules, isolating punishments, and unexplained disappearances that were blamed on accidents or misadventures. Children wrote letters home that never reached their families. Some mentioned a shadow man, others described corridors that seemed alive. One diary entry, dated 1898, reads, "I hear them at night. They call my name, but when I follow, there is nothing. They are everywhere and nowhere. The language is simple, yet the fear is palpable, suffocating." Investigations were rare. The Ashfords' influence over local authorities ensured that scrutiny never extended far enough to uncover the estate's deeper horrors. A priest associated with the orphanage recorded in his journal the unsettling pattern of disappearances. He noted that the Ashfords held particular sway over church leadership, and that those who questioned the family were swiftly removed, quietly reassigned, or left the town under mysterious circumstances. Even he began to fear for his life. Children who remained were often changed, their personalities subdued, eyes hollow, whispers of the family sees everything etched into their consciousness. These psychological scars were intended. The Ashfords understood the power of terror over the young, and of the long shadows it casts across generations. The Ashford family's influence extended to St. Clement's Church, a structure as imposing as it was foreboding. Here, rituals mingled with sermons, and the line between devotion and control blurred. Parishioners spoke of sermons that lasted for hours, focusing on sin, punishment, and the need for obedience. Behind closed doors, the clergy often acted under Ashford guidance, sanctioning practices the public never knew existed. Some historians suggest the Ashfords were heirs to a centuries-old secret society, using religion as a tool to manipulate fear and loyalty. Records hint at initiations involving cryptic symbols, the use of confession as control, and the subtle enforcement of moral terror. Children from the orphanage were brought to the church on certain nights, never to be seen again. Accounts describe crypts beneath the sanctuary, containing remnants of ceremonies meant to bind and shape life force. Even as the town thrived on surface prosperity, those who worked closely with the family whispered of unnatural presences during services. Shadows that moved independently, faint murmurs in Latin, and a chilling silence that followed any act of disobedience. One mid-19th century diary mentions, "I dared not look up at the pulpit, for the eyes of the family stare through you, seeing what you hide from God." The Ashford church network was not merely spiritual, it was structural. It ensured compliance, quelled dissent, and created a web of influence extending to every home, business, and school in Ashford Hollow. Their power was subtle, psychological, and terrifyingly complete. In 1903, renovations on the Ashford mansion revealed a sealed wing, long obscured behind false walls. The rooms inside were untouched by time yet unervingly preserved. Children's toys, faded clothing, and journals stacked meticulously on shelves. Yet there was an unnatural stillness to the air, a cold that seemed to seep into the bones. Scholars later speculated the family had constructed the wing to contain memories, trapped echoes of those who had disappeared. Some of the journals belonged to children who vanished decades earlier. Their handwriting oscillated between innocence and an urgent, panicked clarity. One passage reads, "The shadows move when we sleep. They whisper in my dreams. We are never alone." Others included crude drawings, figures with hollow faces, towering over children in corridors that twisted like serpents. Servants who had lived under the Ashfords' roof described hearing footsteps in the hidden wing, even after it had been sealed. Locals, when told of the discovery, spoke in hushed tones, warning outsiders that curiosity in Ashford Hollow was punished, though no one could explain exactly how. The wing seemed designed not only to trap but to observe. Small peepholes and one-way mirrors suggested that the family watched every move, every reaction, every flicker of fear. It was as though the house itself had consciousness, and the Ashfords merely acted as its vessels. Historians examining the estate now agree. The wing was more than architecture. It was a psychological instrument, a private theater of terror. And while the rest of the mansion remained public-facing, polished and impressive, the hidden wing stood as a silent testament to the depth of the family's obsession with control. Decades after Eleanor's disappearance, a set of her personal diaries surfaced in a pawnshop in Boston. The entries were disjointed, the handwriting uneven, but the fear was unmistakable. Eleanor wrote of secret doors, of faces that appeared in mirrors, and of voices that instructed her to behave or vanish. One passage chillingly states, "I tried to speak, but they would not hear. The house answers them, not me. I am learning to whisper to the walls. Perhaps they will tell me how to leave." Her writings suggest the mansion itself exerted influence over the children. The Ashfords, though human, were extensions of something older, something ritualistic and methodical. Eleanor's last entry ends mid-sentence, with a smear of ink as if she had been interrupted. Experts analyzing the diary detect patterns reminiscent of psychological manipulation techniques later formalized in the 20th century. Eleanor's voice reflects both acute intelligence and deep terror, indicating a child forced to navigate a system designed to erase her sense of self. Even now, reading the diaries, one senses an unbroken connection. The mansion, the family, the town, all intertwined in a network of fear and secrecy that resisted the outside world. By the 1920s, Ashford influence had expanded to several religious seminaries across New England. Alumni recounted strict discipline, harsh punishments, and odd rituals resembling those whispered about in the mansion. Scholars today suspect the Ashfords created a psychological network, molding children into compliance, ensuring secrecy, and perpetuating their influence across generations. Some priests reported seeing figures in the night, shadowy, humanoid, moving with intent. Others heard chanting behind locked doors. The seminars were advertised as centers of learning and faith, but in private, children endured long hours of psychological pressure, threats veiled as moral instruction, and a near-constant surveillance reminiscent of Eleanor's diaries. Letters found decades later hint at a perverse hierarchy. The Ashfords rewarded those who demonstrated obedience and punished dissent with disappearance. Even adults were not immune. Ashford Hollow itself seemed to bend to the family's will. Residents recall neighbors disappearing, only to return years later altered, withdrawn, their eyes hollow. Town leaders deferred to the Ashfords, perhaps out of fear or reverence. Some suggest the town's economy depended entirely on the family's fortune, creating an unspoken contract, silence in exchange for prosperity. Families who questioned the Ashfords were subtly marginalized or vanished from records altogether. Beneath the estate, tunnels twisted for hundreds of feet, linking the mansion to the orphanage, the church, and neighboring estates. Footsteps echoing in these tunnels were reported, yet maps failed to match their layout. It is here that the Ashfords conducted their most secretive rituals. Some accounts describe chanting in dead languages, lights flickering like fireflies in stone halls, and a cold that consumed all warmth. In the tunnels beneath the Ashford estate, the walls seemed to absorb sound. Footsteps, whispers, even screams would vanish into the stone. Those who entered often spoke of a presence that watched without moving, a consciousness older than the town itself. Servants and children alike referred to it as the Silent Ones. These entities were never described directly, only inferred through a profound, instinctive fear. Journals recovered in the 1930s detail how the Ashfords trained children to navigate the tunnels, often blindfolded, as a form of initiation. Compliance was rewarded, hesitation, punished. One entry recounts a boy who refused to proceed. They left me alone, but I felt them everywhere, breathing, watching. I could not move. Even adults admitted feeling manipulated by forces they could not name. A historian studying the estate writes, "The Ashford legacy was not merely cruelty, it was a method of erasing the self. Children were conditioned to see themselves as part of a mechanism, not as individuals. The tunnels were the arteries of this system." Some townspeople, long dead, left cryptic notes in diaries. "Do not look into the walls, they will remember." Scholars debate whether the fear was psychological, supernatural, or both. Ritual played a central role in the Ashford household. Candles flickered over cryptic symbols, and servants reported seeing family members perform acts that defied conventional morality. These rituals were not mere superstition. They were precise, almost surgical exercises in power, shaping the consciousness of those present. Children were instructed to participate, their innocence manipulated into complicity. Repetition, isolation, and subtle psychological conditioning created a network of fear that became almost spiritual. One diary entry reads, "I do what they say, but the shadows follow me. Even when I sleep, I wake to their eyes." The mansion's library contained volumes that seemed older than the family itself. Some were handwritten in languages no scholar could fully identify. Diagrams suggested alchemical and esoteric practices tied to control over life, memory, and perception. Researchers claim the Ashford studies were not idle curiosity. They sought dominion over fear itself. Each book, each scroll, each careful note mapped a system designed to isolate, condition, and absorb the will of those around them. Orphans from St. Margaret's recalled, in fragmented accounts, the experience of being watched. Their lives were governed by silence, routine, and the subtle pressure of unseen eyes. Some tried to escape. Most returned, too frightened to disobey. A letter found in 1941 reads, "They know what I think. They know what I dream. There is no place to hide." The psychological scars left by this environment persisted decades later, marking those who survived with a deep, unshakable anxiety. The family chapel remained a focal point of the Ashfords' control. Stained glass filtered sunlight into unnatural patterns, and statues with hollow eyes seemed to shift in the periphery of vision. Clergy who spoke out against the family were either discredited or disappeared. Congregants recalled sermons that lingered too long on sin, punishment, and obedience, cultivating a pervasive atmosphere of dread. Some whispered that the church itself was an instrument of the Ashford will, designed to mold the mind and spirit alike. Between 1872 and 1945, dozens vanished from Ashford Hollow. Children, servants, and even outsiders never officially accounted for. Local records were erased or altered. Whispers described them moving into the tunnels, the hidden wing, or simply being consumed by the mansion's power. A retired sheriff's diary notes, "They never took us by force. They did it with words, with gaze, with silence. And we obeyed." By the mid-20th century, the Ashford lineage had dwindled, their power waning but not gone. Rumors persisted of surviving family members living in secrecy, maintaining the estate, and continuing rituals in isolation. Even abandoned, the mansion retained its oppressive presence. In 1950, a small team of investigators documented unexplained phenomena. Doors opening on their own, whispers in empty corridors, and shadows that defied logic. They described a consciousness tied to the house, not the people. One investigator noted, "The Ashfords may be gone, but the fear they cultivated remains. It is alive." Survivors, descendants, and townspeople carried the Ashford influence long after the family faded. Anxiety, compulsions, and dreams haunted generations, suggesting the estate's impact extended beyond the physical. The house was no longer a residence. It had become an imprint on the collective psyche of Ashford Hollow. Today, the mansion stands in ruin, ivy choking stone and timber. Yet visitors report chills, the sensation of being watched, and sudden whispers in empty rooms. Paranormal researchers and psychologists alike agree. Whether supernatural or psychological, the Ashford imprint persists. The Ashford tale is a study in hidden corruption and the human capacity for fear as control. Their legacy, sealed wings, tunnels, diaries, and rituals, reveals a family who weaponized innocence and obedience. Perhaps the greatest horror is not death, but the enduring imprint of terror, a darkness that continues to whisper through generations, waiting for the curious to peer too closely and learn what they were never meant to know.